Okay, welcome back to the build, everybody. Here's a glamour shot of the rear of the SLC. I have to tell you, I am very proud of the work I've done on this car. It's taken me forever, but I have to say I'm happy with how it's coming out. But anyway, in this video, I'm going to cover what I've completed in the engine compartment. And with the exception of the linear actuator for the parking brake and the fuel filler neck, all the fabrication is done. So I could really start the engine up at any time. It's just a matter of in what order I want to complete things and fill it up with fluid and start it up. But anyway, I thought I'd be at this point last November, but the lack of space continues to be the enemy of progress. And it just takes time to figure out where to put all the components, how to run the hoses and the harnesses, how to make brackets with very tight tolerances. But anyway, I'm going to walk you through the work I've done, and for the most part, the rear end of the car is done. Okay, so thanks for watching and stay tuned. Okay, let's take a look at how I mounted the engine harness. A while back, I fabricated this transition bracket that basically connects the General Motors PCM bracket to the chassis. And then I used some silicone P-clamps to mount the main trunk along the frame rail. And that trunk sort of ducks underneath that AC hose bracket and also the intercooler bracket. It wraps around the back and attaches to the rear of the engine. Those are M5 screws, and I use some threaded inserts because the threads on the block are M8 screws, but I got those from McMaster-Carr. Those worked out well. And then you can see along the top of the intercooler, you have the passenger side branch. These are for the ignition coils and then to some other sensors there. So that looks nice and neat. And then the same thing over on the right side of the engine. Okay, so I also covered the fuel line hose with a heat guard, and that's a fiberglass based heat guard. That's PTFE stainless steel hose. It can handle like 500 degrees, but I wanted to add some additional insulation just to protect it from a vapor lock. And then if we look over to the left side, you can see the final mounting of the intake elbow. And that elbow is about 10 inches long, and you have the throttle body on the end of it. And this throttle body is not light. Definitely weighs a pound or two. And I was concerned with the vibration that it would loosen up the screws that hold the intake elbow on. So I fabricated this sort of funky bracket which makes its way and connects down below to the engine block. So that bracket and the intake elbow will move together, but it really strengthens up the install here. So now I'm not too worried about it. And then the other thing is I custom fabricated this intake elbow, and you can see the fresh air intake down below. And then you have the bung for the MAF sensor and a bung for the PCV hose. Also, GM recommends that the MAF is at least 10 inches from the throttle body, and that there's a 6-inch straight section before the MAF sensor. So I did my best to try to follow GM's rules. Okay, and we take a peek here, and this is the intercooler tank, and underneath the tank is the intercooler pump. You can see the base of the pump there. So it sits right under that tank. And to the left of that is a base to plug in 4 temperature sensors. So we're going to monitor the temperature in the intercooler tank, the oil in the dry sump tank, also the oil in the transaxle, and the ambient temperature in the rear engine compartment. And there's a temp sensor there. And I have it close to the exhaust and near where the shifter cables go. The shifter cables are going to go on this side of this heat shielding here. And I just want to make sure that that area doesn't get too hot. Now these fans are going to run after I shut the engine off, and it'll monitor the temperature in this area, and the fans will shut off once it cools down quite a bit. Okay, so that's one other thing that I added to the build. Okay, a few other things with regard to the intercoolers. On both sides I added these lower brackets. Originally I designed it just with the upper bracket, but they were a little too shaky. So I added those lower brackets. One's over there, and then we have one, you can see it right down there. And that adds a ton of strength, just like the intake elbow to that particular install. The other thing is, if you look at these intercooler tanks, this side connects with that side over there, and the tube runs sort of underneath the front engine mount. And then if we look at the top of the intercooler or top of the engine, you have an intercooler fill port. I purchased this from a company called LSX Concepts. They make really nice billet fittings for the GM engines. And then this is the return hose, and that connects to that particular hose on the intercooler, and that sort of runs along the bottom and up into the engine. So a nice, neat install for the intercoolers and the tubing. Okay, and a while back I showed the battery and the fuse install, so nothing changed there. Just for the sake of completeness, I'll show all the fuses. So I got a fuse to the starter, a fuse to the main electrical up front, and a fuse to the alternator. A little overkill, but I just in case the wire touches the frame or shorts, I wanted to have some protection in that area. Okay, another thing I fabricated, I actually fabricated a pair of these. So right here is a set of brackets, and that's a vehicle speed sensor, and that sensor will feed the electronic power steering, and the e-pass system is variable speed, so it'll add boost when the car's going slower and reduce boost when you're on the highway to improve the feel of the steering. Then I have one here, there you go, you can sort of see there's a GM, that's a GM speed sensor, and that is for the ECU, or the PCM, the powertrain control module. Now the AIM dash can actually read that value, so I may use the speed sensor on the left to feed the AIM, or I may use the CAN bus picking up the speed signal from the GM VSS, so I'll have to figure that out. But that was quite a bit of work. Those were, I think, a total of 4 brackets. Very precise to get those lined up and sit about 0.5 millimeter from the ABS tone ring that I installed on the axles. Okay, in a prior video I fabricated the brackets for the Transaxle Cooler. Here basically they're installed, and you can see where they sit relative to the exhaust tips, and that's going to tuck right under the back of the body. And then you have the transaxle thermostat, and there's the temperature sensor for the transaxle oil temp sender. All right, so very happy with the way that turned out. Okay, and this is the final sump tank install. Many moons ago, I created that bracket to mount the tank. I basically connected the tank to the engine sump on the bottom of the engine. So we'll segue over to that. You can see how those hoses clear the exhaust downpipe, and they actually connect basically right here to the top of the tank, and then also down below. Okay, well, here's a view of the oil tank hoses. The hose closest to the camera here, this is the oil return from the bottom of the sump tank, and then the far hose travels up to the top of the oil tank, and that's the feed tube or the return tube. All right, but anyway, that's sort of the best view, and you can see sort of a nice gap between that and the exhaust down pipe, and that down pipe will get some sort of shielding as well. Okay, one more thing about the oil tank install is the PCV install. And I ordered the factory hose assemblies for the LT4 Corvette setup, and I scavenged a number of the fittings. So a fitting here for that side of the valve cover. There's a Y fitting over here. There's also a quick connect 90-degree fitting right down there. And then this one was impossible to find standalone, so I ordered the hose assembly. That's a 45-degree quick connect fitting, and it's nice that that sort of directs the hose right above the engine harness along the top of the what's called the intercooler manifold. But anyway, all these hoses sort of connect to the oil sump tank. This connects to the intake, and that's sort of a baffled fitting, not a baffled fitting, but in a baffled chamber, so that it only takes the gas and sends it back to the intake, not the oil itself. And then I have a dual fitting here, and this hose connects to the engine side, and this hose connects to the passenger side. And that's sort of the way the stock Corvette LT4 is plumbed. So, you know, I'm trying to meet full ODB2 emissions and didn't want to experiment unnecessarily. All right, so that's the PCV install. Okay, and the last couple components here, we'll cover the header tank install. So the header tank basically connects to the top, that hose there connects to the top of the thermostat outlet. There's a steam vent fitting, and then there's another hose that'll go to the bleeder hose on the radiator. And then this side connects to an overflow tank. So the header tank is pretty small. It's only a liter, and by my calculations, this system is going to expand either a half a liter or a full liter. So that fluid has to go somewhere. So the fluid will travel out of the cap and down into the overflow tank into the bottom, and it'll fill this up when it expands, and then when it cools, it'll be drawn back up into the header tank and into the cooling system. So I think that'll work out well. I just didn't have room, you know, on that firewall for really a bigger tank. I thought about putting a sister tank in this area, but I like this setup, so hopefully it'll work. All right, let's see, what else? Oh, the last item here is the heater hose basically Y's off here, and that Y connects to the bottom of the header tank. So it'll return trapped air in the system up to the header tank. So it connects trapped air from the heater core and also trapped air from the top of the radiator. So it's a self-bleeding system. Or in theory, it's a self-bleeding system. We'll see how it goes. All right, so that's about it. I mean, as I stated before, I really could add fluids. I have enough electronics to fire the engine up and see how it goes. So depending upon my build order here, I'm going to fill it up with fluid and get it started at some point in the near future. All right, well, thanks for watching, as always, and take care.